we go.
Welcome back to everyone to Cult Musical Zone. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite cult musicals that doesn't get a lot of recognition, in my opinion, and that is Streets of Fire. Now, we have two cult musical aficionados that probably have a deeper appreciation of the time, but also a deeper appreciation of the film, possibly, than I do. So, why don't you guys introduce yourself and tell me your first time seeing this film and your introduction to it?
All right. I'll go. I'm Helena, and I've been on a few of these podcasts, and I think they are super, super fun because I love talking about movies. And this is one of the rare ones I had not seen, and I feel like I just have certain gaps. I've told the story before about how my mom, like, she rage quit E.T. in 1982, and so then we did not go back to another 80s movie. So I have a big gap when that comes to that. Like the 70s musicals, I know a lot about, but this one was new to me. So I went over to the local video store and I rented it and watched it, and it's pretty dang cool.
And my name is David Mass, and this is my first session for this group. So I'm very happy that you asked me to be part of this. Thank you. My first experience with Streets of Fire, I've never seen it at the cinema, but again, I saw, as well as Helena, I saw it on video. And I remember going to the video store and seeing the video, and also seeing there was another video that was part of it as well. It was like a complimentary thing that just had the music videos, and it also had a documentary about the making of it. It was a separate kind of thing. And I remember renting both of those and just really falling in love with it was mainly the music that drew me to it. And I thought Diane Lane was good, and Michael Barre and the other actors. Actually, yeah, the movie, it just made an impact with me. And I've just been a fan of it ever since. And I don't know how many times I've seen it, but I do love it.
It must have made an impact on you if you're wearing an Ellen shirt.
Yeah, this is just care of Redbubble. It's not an official one, but yeah, absolutely.
Now, I've never asked this question, but what is your cult musical connection with each other? Because I know you all are cult musical bosom buddies. Is that is that y'all are?
Xanadu, man, we are Xanadu fans. David has asked me to leave him the muse art in my will. We'll have to see about that, but we'll see if there's a cost associated there. But no, we've been Facebook friends forever and ever and ever. So it's really nice to finally kind of get to talk to you a little bit more and to actually see you on a screen in a bigger format.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So so we have that in common. We're big fans of Xanadu. I've got a few Xanadu memorabilia things as well, like one of the original cells from the musical number "Don't Walk Away."
Oh, I didn't know you had that.
Sorry?
Oh, I didn't know you had that. Dang it.
Oh, I can't remember. We've had so many conversations. I thought I sent you photos of everything that I've collected, but yeah. So I've got that. I'll send you a photo of it. But yeah, we have that in common. So that's another really fantastic movie that I'm a big fan of as well. And I've been to quite a few of the locations where they filmed it, and yeah, that had a big impact on my life as well, Xanadu. So we have that in common.
And we've brought you together through the power of Streets of Fire.
All across the world.
I'm telling you. The first time
all over the world.
Yeah, we are.
Anyway.
The first time I saw this movie was in the summer of 2016. It had been released on DVD through I'm not quite sure which platform or which home video company, but I saw it in 2016 and I loved it automatically. But for me, it had a very neo-noir sort of midnight movie feel to it. And it's a film that you don't necessarily have to pay attention to, but it still doesn't lose its beauty. And I don't know if you if you all know some background information about this film and how it was made, but it sort of goes back to what Helena talks to. Sometimes in the 70s and the 80s, a lot of companies were cash heavy in terms of having so much money to spend on movies that they didn't know what to do with it. And I believe, from my research and my information, that that's basically what Streets of Fire was. It had so much money thrown at it in terms of production, in terms of music, in terms of cast, in terms of writing, etc., that it almost didn't have the odds stacked against it. But the release is a different story. So, regardless if you don't know a lot of background information about this film, what do you think of its, before we get into the plot, etc., what do you think of just how beautifully made it is? I mean, it's gorgeously shot.
Well, I can go back and kind of talk about Walter Hill, the director. I mean, he was coming off a big old string of hits at the time. Like there was The Warriors, which of course also starred Sonny from Xanadu, but that was like a huge movie of the time. It's right up there with kind of Escape from New York and sort of that importance of that era. So he had The Warriors. He had also done like 48 Hours, which was massive, massive, massive film. And just a whole bunch of films like that. He had done, I think, something on aliens, it looks like. Red Heat. I mean, he was really in a string of hits. And so they're like, let's give this guy all the money. And because he's a hit maker, he's gonna turn this out. So I think that's kind of what the studios probably thought with Walter Hill at that time. He kind of decreased after this and kind of did some TV and stuff, which is great too. I mean, he's a good director. But yeah, I mean, obviously this movie does have a lot of money behind it, which is why it looks a lot the way that it does. And it has a lot of neon, which is fantastically expensive, really lovely. I mean, I think that's probably one of the most beautiful parts of the movie. And of course, some of that neon was also made by the same guy that did the Xanadu neon, which is really cool. I read that in one of the trivia pieces. So there's a little bit of, DNA kind of overlapping there with the neon. But yeah, that's kind of what I know about it.
I mean, like
Uh,
I
Sorry,
say,
go on.
oh, sorry, before, like we always
No,
say,
go on. Go on.
all cult movie musicals have a connection. Every single cult movie musical that we talk to, even from Best Little Whorehouse to Xanadu to Grease to Rocky Horror, they all have a connection. And before we get into your perception of all this, yeah, there's lots of connections with this and many other cult movie musicals as well. But what were you going to say?
I was going to mention a lot of things that you just mentioned, Helena, as well, but also I just love especially with the neon, I remember watching one of the behind the scenes documentaries. They were talking about how they were going off a lot of the ambience from the things like the neon and the lights and things like that. That's a look that they were going for. And it does have this Walter Hill who wrote it, and he was the director as well that you mentioned. He wanted to go for a comic book kind of feel about the film, and you can kind of pick up on that. It kind of has the colors and that of a comic book. Just look at the visuals and that behind us and some of these wallpapers. It does have that kind of thing, and he wanted to do like a film version of a comic book action kind of thing and then the music was a big part of it as well. But there is a lot of connections with well, we've already talked about Xanadu, but a lot of other connections with Xanadu. So the producers Lawrence Gordon also produced Xanadu, and Joel Silver was a co-producer of Xanadu, and they were the co-producer and producer of this film. So there's a lot of those connections. And I didn't realize about the neon, about the same. I didn't know that. So that's interesting. The same person that did the neon in Xanadu.
It's
Yeah.
that design that I love so much from that whole era. It's almost like they took the sort of 40s neon from Xanadu and morphed it into like the 50s neon that they use so kind of all over the place. And then it gets into that whole like 80s neon at the end too, where they're performing in front of that incredible scrim that has all the neon in the background, where it's like it just goes full 80s via the 50s, which is kind of awesome. And that's the whole outlook of the whole movie.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a connection with Xanadu, which I did not know, which is huge. It was huge connection. I mean, it's a huge sort of, I guess, another proves our point that every cult movie musical is connected. You can't really separate cult movie musicals, regardless if it's just one producer or one writer or one musician or an actor and actress. They're all interconnected. And for Xanadu to be so tied with this film is something I didn't even know prior to this podcast, that there was a huge connection. Do you think that was subconscious or unconscious, that they were just trying to make another buck and do another movie, or maybe they wanted to do something, another cult musical that was glittery?
Uh, do you want me to go first?
Go for it.
Yeah, I don't know. It could just be that they've worked together in the past and that kind of thing, and they've just decided to come together and do another film. But it has elements of like the finale with where she's singing tonight. Just tonight is what it means to be young. Has that? I suppose it's not obviously not the same as Xanadu, but it's like it's female singer and kind of the focus is on her in that final scene, and it's getting higher and higher, the notes in the song. And for me, it's like there's some similarities, like subconsciously, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe they were just they had a good relationship working on things like Xanadu and everything, and they've just kind of come together, and that's why some of the elements that were in Xanadu are in this film as well, because you've got all these people that they like a certain look about the film and think about films and things like that, and that's kind of come together in this film as well.
And they had a lot of money. They had a lot of money for this movie. I mean, the film was shot in New York, Chicago, and LA, and
Right.
Universal Studios.
And
So
under a giant tarp that cost $1.2 million, which is insane because they could only shoot during the day because the actors were young and they couldn't, by child labor laws, they couldn't work them all night, that's insane. I mean, talk about the amount of money that's just that is just crazy. And to try to shoot it during the day and make everything night during the day on this huge set.
But that's what adds to the very beautiful noir feel to it, because Little Shop of Horrors was filmed a city inside of a set.
Right.
Bugsy Malone inside of a set. Dick Tracy inside of a set. Who
Mhm.
Framed Roger Rabbit. So I say those musicals because I consider those to be the neo-noir cult movie musicals. So they all have, I mean, technically in my mind, they could all take place in the same universe because the times are very vague of when these movies take place. Bugsy Malone's dated, but Dick Tracy and Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Streets of Fire and Little Shop of Horrors possibly take place in this universe because it's very vague of when these neo-noir sort of movie
Mhm.
music take place.
Yeah, it's very 40s, 50s, and then sort of 50s into the early 60s as you get a nice spread of time. But they all have a similar kind of that sort of dreamy, fake reality of a forgotten time. And that's definitely what I was reading about Streets of Fire is they don't really tell you where or when, but it's a mishmash of, different, it's like kind of 50s, kind of 80s.
Right.
There's like technology that overlaps, the music styles kind of overlap. I don't know if that's to the detriment of the movie, because I was trying to think, it's like, would I like this movie more if it was more like totally 50s and maybe had other 50s themes in it, like racism or other things like that, more so, or if it was more 80s and had smaller. That's one thing I was thinking about when I was going back and mentally recalibrating myself.
Before we get past in the plot and the music, I was going to bring up the tarp thing. I'm glad you reminded me, but I kind of like the idea of this film and Bugsy Malone and Little Shop and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. They kind of have a shock treatment shock treatment feel to it, where it's all condensed and it's sort of like a fake world with I don't know how you would get that. What your opinion? Describe that of like being a condensed sort of consolidated world where you can't really escape it. I find that beautiful. I don't know.
Yeah, David, do
Yeah.
you want to go take that one?
Yeah, I totally understand. I can see that as well. It is like its own little world with all different elements of different periods, just like Xanadu. I shouldn't be mentioning that, but that was a mixture of the 1940s. There was the Art Deco elements and things like that in the 80s, of course. So again, it is its own little world, and it's got little parts of history pulled out and like made into this new reality that has all these different elements of different times and things like that. And that's one of the things that does make it unique and special, I think.
Because you can't place when it takes place, if that makes sense. And I like that. Very mysterious. You're like, oh, this could take place, but here's a kick-ass 80s banger, you know? I mean, same
Yeah.
thing with Dick Tracy. I mean, I don't know, in my little mind, and keep your eye out on Cult Musical Con that comes out April the 1st, because I sort of set I don't know if you're familiar with what the Cult Musical Con's gonna be, but fans from the blog and all over the world have recorded covers of many cult musical songs, and I sort of set Dick Tracy and Fire and Little Shop and Who Framed Roger Rabbit in the same little world
Nice.
because I think it works. It's very cartoon, but it's also very comic book. It's very comic book, very, I don't know what date, what could you, I guess, what kind of comic book series could you compare this sort of world of the neo-noir cult musicals to?
I'm probably not that up on comic books, but if you go back and see kind of how Walter Hill repackaged the Warriors, the second he kind of director's cut of it, he set it in the framework of a comic book, and it'll go into sort of a comic page, and then that'll go into the live action. So I think he was very influenced by probably crime comics, probably, I mean, I don't think superhero comics as much probably, but more probably like the crime kind of film noir-y kind of comics of the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
I agree, but if I'm not really that much into comics either, I think, as you mentioned, like Dick Tracy has like the colors and things like that has some influence on this film, maybe, and as you said, like I remember the last time I saw this film, like a lot of the scene changes, they were kind of like these flashing things, like it was going into a comic book kind of thing where it was a change of the scene. So I definitely think that you know, comic books in general had an influence on how this was the final product of how it was edited and everything.
Yeah, and I think Walter Hill said something to that effect. I was reading earlier in the trivia. It's he said he wanted to make the coolest comic book where it was like blue neon and hard bitten heroes and dames and singing and stuff like that. So I think it all makes sense. I either wish that it was dialed up a little bit more or dialed down a little bit more, but that's just me. I make very nitpicky aesthetic judgments, as James well knows. So
Well, moving on, we usually start with a plot, but the cast, you can't get into this film without mentioning the cast. I mean, there's so many cult musical connections. Michael Perry, of course, is from Eddie and the Cruisers, and Eddie and the Cruisers 2, Eddie Lives. And then, of course, Diane Lane is from Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains. Rick Moranis go on to do Little Shop of Horrors. So, I mean, there is that connection of the cult movie musical, and it's so beautiful to me as a cult movie musical fan to see all these cult musical icons together in a film that happens to be a cult movie musical. I mean, so it's that connection's there between all of those films, and they're all intertwined. Besides the Xanadu connection and possibly the Dick Tracy influence, you have those three stars who make this film, and also what makes it so special is that they later, either before this film or after this film, went to go do subsequent cult movie musicals. So I think the cast is brilliant, and of course the wonderful and terrifying and sexy William Dafoe, who I don't did another musical after this. I could be wrong.
I need to go back and look it up, but I'm pretty sure this was like one of his earliest movies. But it's funny because he still looks basically the same, except a little more kind of lighthouse captain-y. But that's yeah, he's kind of timeless, I guess.
He's timeless.
This is the first film that I've actually seen him, that I've actually noticed him and seen him in anything. And then obviously after this film, he was in a lot of other things. But yeah, he was a real standout. He was awesome.
Oh yeah, he was in The Hunger. I'm just looking at his IMDb, which is also an amazing cult musical.
Oh yeah.
Well, we got to do The Hunger sometime. I will say with William Dafoe, I really wish, because he's so charismatic in this, I wish that the lead had been, I feel like he wasn't as charismatic as like a William Dafoe. It's like if you're going to have two guys going at it, I feel like they need to both be equally matched. And I just feel like Michael Pare was a little kind of more subdued. It's almost like if I could go back and magically cast this with my my magic casting wand, it would be like a Patrick Swayze in that role. Like just really burn the shit down, you know? Like roadhouse it all the way.
I
Yeah.
think Carrier as Tom Cody, I think he was supposed to be, it's sort of like Warren Beatty as Dick Tracy. It's the characters around him that are supposed to get the spotlight. He's supposed to be subdued in this really comical, sort of crazy comic world. So, Ellen could totally be Breathless.
Mhm.
Breathless Mahoney from Dick Tracy. Raven could totally be, Big Boy or
Mhm.
Lit. And so I think it's because a lot of the characters are very comic book, and Tom Cody's very subdued, but I think he's supposed to be a hunk, which he is, and he's supposed to be the hero. But yeah, he's a bit wooden, but there's something very sexy about him that's sort of like too cool to care. Because he was even too cool to care in Eddie and the Cruisers and Eddie and the Cruisers too. He
Mhm.
still was a bit, I don't know, too cool to care. I don't know if that's his
Yeah.
shtick.
Was he campy enough for this, do you think? I mean, I think it could have been campier, which would have made it more fun. But that's just my humble opinion.
Well, he's sexy enough for it. That's all I'm gonna say.
There you go.
Sorry.
They'll probably just trying to go for that strong silent type. I'm not sure how good an actor he is. I've only seen him in a few things. That might have been the limitations of his acting skills. Or he might have been a really good actor and he was just doing this because that's how they wanted it. They just wanted like a strong silent type that looked good and so maybe that's how it played out because it was supposed to. But yeah, I can imagine a few other actors that could probably make it a little bit more interesting. But I thought he was suited kind of to this role. But
Do you controversial
so-
thing to say that possibly he's very sort of beautiful, but wouldn't kind of like Christopher Atkins in the pirate movie and Maxwell Caulfield in Grease too? Or is that
I
not?
think he has the right look, but that sense of humor and the sense of knowing what he's in just is kind of missing. And I got that when I was reading some of the quotes about how he was kind of miffed by Rick Moranis because I guess Rick Moranis would just give him shit on the set and he kind of couldn't take it. And so I'm like, this is an interesting, like, you can't roll with the joke, you know. It kind of struck me when I read that quote. It was like, okay.
Which sort of reiterates that Rick Moranis, there's been lots of stories of Rick Moranis's. I mean, I don't believe in cancel culture, but there's lots of stories of Rick Moranis purposely trying to twist and annoy you on set, and some people like it, and some people can handle it, and some people don't. He's even Rick Moranis is super obnoxious in this film. I
Oh
almost
yeah.
hate in this film.
Yeah, he's kind of the hateful pipsqueak, and it's just weird that they let him go off with the girl at the end, which is weird. I mean, no spoilers, but yeah.
I
You
don't
know,
know. So we've never really talked about the characters, but the characters are, and the reason that we're talking about the characters first is because Streets of Fire was not supposed to end, it wasn't just supposed to be this. It was supposed to be a trilogy. It had always been planned to be a trilogy. It never was supposed to be just this, because if you watch the first film, well, the only film, it sort of lacks a substantial plot. And in its defense, it's because they never thought, the writers and the producers and the director never thought this was going to be the only part of the Tom Cody saga. So it would just be like ending with the very first Star Wars film and then not continuing. So in their defense, the reason why there really is no plot, or in terms of the plot ends almost instantly, in their defense, they intended to make a trilogy, but unfortunately, you can't ever assume that a film is going to do well enough to warrant a sequel, more or less, a third film. So, what do you think of the plot of the film? Do you think the redeeming quality is that they had a bigger vision, or do you think that it stands alone plot wise?
yeah, Dave, go ahead. I'll go after.
I think I think I don't. I think the plot was okay. I don't think it was great. I don't know if it would be enough to want people to want to get people to want there to be like a sequel. It was just kind of like a little bit formulaic kind of thing. It was that there was boy meets girl. There's the big fight in the middle of it, and then there's the kind of happy ending kind of thing where people, and it's just kind of I can't even imagine where that would. I suppose the main character and would go off and go on to another adventure. It could be that kind of a story. I can't imagine Diane Lane being that character being in a sequel and things like that. I just don't know how that storyline would carry on with those characters. But the main character for Michael Paré, I could imagine him going on to another adventure kind of thing. But I think that Diane Lane's story and that kind of thing would kind of like be. I can't imagine that carrying on.
Yeah, he kind of gets the Casablanca ending treatment in this movie for sure, because he just goes off with the sidekick and leaves the woman he loves behind for no real reason. I mean, there's this whole thing about, I could never live in your world. It's like, yeah, you could have. But that's just
the whole Tom Cody trilogy was supposed to not stop here. It's supposed to go on, and it was supposed to have a very, very Mad Max feel. So the sequels were going to be called The Far City and The Long Night and The Far City, or The Far City and then The Long Night. But the next one was supposed to take place in snow, so like an ice place, like an ice city. And then the second one was supposed to be, or the third one was supposed to take place in the desert, very a la Mad Max. So it'd be really interesting to see what they would have done with that, what kind of villains they would have met. Would Raven and his gang would have chased Tom Cody in one or both sequels? Would Ellen not be in the sequel, like Breathless Mahoney wasn't going to be in Dick Tracy too? Or would she not have given up on Tom Cody and they would have reunited? But I wish we could have seen the beautiful contrast between this neon city and then the snow city and then the desert. What do you think about that failed opportunity to create the Tom Cody saga, quote unquote?
Knowing that, I feel like this first movie does not line that up very well, honestly. I just feel like this movie needed to have either more action beats or more dystopian beats or something, instead of just being sort of like, oh, she's kidnapped, now we got to go get her. And, there's some cool fight sequences in there, but there should have been more sort of either build up and payoff. It's sort of like there's a lot of build up in this movie, and it's very consistent. I don't feel like it ever is kind of like, oh God, what's going to happen next? It's like, he's going to go get the girl. He's going to get the girl. They're going to have hijinks on the way getting back out of the city, which they do. But if there had been more challenges or more sort of emotional depth to some of the characters, I feel like there could have been that sort of more like, eat your pop, you're putting your popcorn in your mouth watching this movie, like, oh, what's going to happen next? It's like, you pretty much know what's going to happen throughout this movie. And if they're going to do something cool, like put it in an ice city or a desert city, I want to see something that's, like fleshed out. You know what I mean? That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I totally agree in regards to, I don't think there was enough emotional depth with his character, and maybe just like Dick Tracy, that's a similar thing. It's not a lot of emotional depth with those kind of characters, but it makes you wonder, like, do you care, like, what happens to this character? Do you care what's going to happen? Is there going to be another movie? Because it's kind of just a little bit, there isn't a lot of emotional depth. And is there something about him that makes you want to care to go and see another film about him, or to see if he's going to be okay? And he's the sidekick, Amy, is it Madigan? Amy Madigan?
Yeah.
I found her a little irritating.
Really? Okay. I kind of like.
No, I really thought it was interesting. I remember seeing there was a couple of little documentaries. There was one of the making ofs where she said that she approached the producers or something and said, "Why don't you make this character a female?" And they said yes, and I think that's great. But just personally for me, I didn't think, and I thought that was a great idea. But just her acting in that role, it just didn't do much for me. But that's just me. I don't know. It would have been good to see more about her as well, and a little bit more about her background. And it was just kind of like, the bar fights and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think if she and Tom Cody had more of a history where they were more emotionally
Yeah.
bonded beyond like, oh, hey, you gave me a place to sleep for the night, which is really the only bond that they have in this movie. It's kind of odd, and also going back to Tom Cody too, the fact that he punches his true love in the face on a subway to get her to go away. I was like, what an asshole.
Yeah.
It's like, send her away with, somebody like trick her, like, so she has to go on the subway or whatever, but he's just like bonk. And it's like, all right, I'm going back to fight the bad guy.
Set up. He was set up to be like the next Indiana Jones, and that's why one studio backed out of producing this, because they thought it was too similar to Indiana Jones. So the whole leading man trilogy, he was meant to be the next Indiana Jones, and this was supposed to be. And if you see that kind of there is that sort of interesting sort of, I don't know, spirit there to maybe Raven wouldn't be the.
But he's just not charismatic enough.
So you think that's maybe the reasons that it never took off, is that he didn't have the charisma to be like this action hero in this noir world?
It's a hard pass. No, sorry.
I think, and I think that could be one of the reasons why there wasn't. It just didn't. Obviously, it's a cult following now. There's a cult following now with this film, and but maybe it was just too like, I love it, but maybe it was just too kind of, people weren't really sure what it was supposed to be, and they weren't used to the. Like, looking back and reflecting on it now and analyzing now, it's wonderful how they put all different elements in this film to bring it all together. And obviously there's something about it, because there's like a lot of people love this film, but then just kind of for the average person going to the cinema, sitting there with popcorn and that, maybe it was just all, they weren't really sure kind of what it was. It wasn't the formula that they were used to.
It's like the look of this movie, it's like everything builds up, I think, so much to where you have the rock and roll and you have the visuals and you have all of this, and then the story is just kind of like.
Well, I think it had the blueprint to become something beautiful, and the writers and the directors and the producers were onto something pretty kick-ass. I mean, for me, I'm a kid of the 90s. You can correct me if there wasn't something like this, but I think it would have been pretty cool and kick-ass and sort of revolutionary to have this rock and roll fable take the first in a neo-noir sort of unidentified place, the second in a snow kingdom or an ice kingdom, and the third in a desert. I mean, do you think that would have been highly original, or they were just following the trends of the time of the movies? What do you think?
Well, it was definitely riding the noir trend of the mid 80s like that. I mean, I think this prefigures a little bit of what you get more into as you go into like 88, 87, 88, maybe, where it was kind of more about the 50s and noir, whether before it was more like the 40s and noir, kind of with Blade Runner. So I think it was definitely riding like an aesthetic trend. And that gets back to, people in their 40s at the time, kind of like how I'm in my 40s now, and it's like all the stuff from the 80s is nostalgic. So in the 80s, all the people who grew up, or were born in the 40s, that was nostalgic. So it was sort of riding a wave of that kind of era of nostalgia, kind of boomer nostalgia for all that stuff at the time.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it any better than that. I totally agree with that.
There's so many important things to talk about the music. Do you think it did anything revolutionary, do you think, for the time and for 1984? Do you think there was anything about this film sans the music, but the aesthetic, the sort of what they were hoping to do in terms of a trilogy, was there anything in your opinion that was groundbreaking in terms of anything?
Well, it brought that noir sensibility more towards leaning towards the 50s, like the late 50s, early 60s kind of thing with the neon and all that kind of stuff, which that became more of a thing. I mean, you even see that kind of design in like Back to the Beach as well. You see like a lot of neon, a lot of bright colors. You kind of get that more aesthetic as you go on. So I think this was kind of the leading edge of that aesthetically. So whoever was the designer on it, I think knew kind of was dialed into some trends at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So the other thing with the soundtrack was like it just had that mixture of, like, if you look at the soundtrack, it had rockabilly sound.
The blasters, yeah.
Sorry?
Oh, the blasters.
And
Yeah,
what
the
about
blasters. And then there was a mixture of that song Countdown to Love. So it's kind of like a 50s harmony kind of thing going on with this incredible Jim Steinman tracks that were just kind of really, really over the top and very long, which I love. And it was just very unique, just like Xanadu, I suppose, again, but just that really unique combination, mixture of different styles, and that all put into one. And it was really because of this soundtrack that introduced me to, well, it didn't introduce me to, but got me more into Jim Steinman's kind of things. Like I knew about Bonnie Tyler and all that, but it got me, I was more interested in that kind of really kind of over the top produced rock sound that Jim Steinman used to produce. I think it's a great soundtrack.
What makes this movie, sorry. Yeah, the music is, and we'll get into music now. The music is what I know has made it a cult movie musical, but also has kept the legacy going. And when you think like lots of cult movie musicals, sometimes they had outside writers come in, really prolific songwriters come in to write. And when you look at the soundtrack, the songs are written by some of rock and roll's greatest writers. Sorcerer is written by Stevie Nicks. You can hear her not only on the soundtrack, but in the film singing background vocals. Dan Hartman, of course. Tom Petty wrote the song Never Be You. And then, of course, they brought Jim Steinman in to write 2 songs. So these songs fit well together, in my opinion. But the most important thing I think that's created this legacy of this movie are those songs that are featured in this film, because they're not just some songs that they hired singers to do. It's like even the Pirate movie has Trevor Farrant wrote a lot of Tina Turner songs. So cult movie musicals, especially in the 80s, they hired outside really prolific songwriters to write these songs. And what better songwriters than Stevie Nicks, Tom Petty, and and Jim Steinman to come along to write these songs? What do you guys, I think I sort of had that spiel, but I think that's what is so important about this film is the music and how prolific the songwriters are that composed the songs to this movie.
Yeah. I can go if you want.
Yes.
Yeah, the soundtrack on this, I mean, it was kind of inescapable for a period in the 80s and like 85, 86. I was kind of looking back and it's like, I Can Dream About You, that song, I felt like that song was everywhere for like a year. And I feel like it was like in 85, 86. And of course, I don't have the chart in front of me, but that song was recorded in 1983 originally, which is kind of interesting to me because it sounds much more like a song that would have come out of the later 80s. I mean, unless that was the production. And to David's point earlier, when he was talking about how the songs overall kind of sounded, that was just that sort of heavy production sound of the era, which I personally love. I know people, they just can't, they're just like, it's fake, it's this, it's that, but it's canned. It's like, no, it's like, it's really kind of beautiful. It's sort of taking it out of the realm of reality, which I like. And that again feeds back into the theme of the movie, is like, it's not a real reality. It's a sort of manufactured reality, which is great. But those songs were everywhere. for a few
Yeah.
years. I probably heard the songs a million times on the radio.
Yeah. And it's like, as you're saying, the Dan Hartman song was the one that we had on in Australia quite a lot on the radio. It was very kind of to the times, and it was I don't remember hearing any of the Jim Steinman songs like on the radio. I know they were released as singles, and they were edited as well because they were quite long on the soundtrack, so the single versions were shortened. But I don't remember hearing those on the radio. But I do remember hearing the Dan Hartman, and you still hear it in shopping centers and things like that. So that was more kind of like for that period kind of thing, where it would be a contemporary pop song. But I just wanted to throw this might be the time to tell you, this is my songbook for Streets of Fire.
Nice.
It has all the sheet music to all the songs.
Excellent.
Sorry, I know it's hard to see. I can
You have to kind of hold it in front of your chest, I think is.
Yeah.
There you
So
go.
this has got songs to the soundtrack, which is really good. Also, this is the original album that I've had for ages.
Oh,
So I've
very
got
nice.
it a while, Streets of Fire.
Promotional
I'm just
content.
throwing this in because we're talking about the soundtrack. This is the Japanese release of the soundtrack, which is probably the best sounding one, apparently, according to the reviews. That's the American one. And that's the German one with a different cover.
Nice. Yeah, Dave is an A++ collector. He's one of those. We're up there.
Like a marketer's dream.
Yep. Yeah.
So-
If we obsess about something, we buy everything related to it. I think kind of
Yeah.
Dave, is that right? Yeah.
And they're the Blu-rays that I have.
Oh,
The
nice.
American one and the German one.
Very nice.
Sorry, German one, American
Yep.
one.
Do you play
Just
the
Sorry?
do you play the piano?
Play the guitar a little bit. But sing, I used to sing. I don't do that anymore. But I'll also have this as well. I used to sing with this, which was inspired by the film.
Nice.
The Shure microphone. And I did
Very nice.
need a microphone when I was doing some recordings. And when I saw this, it obviously I was inspired by this film because that's the one she's holding in the background. So yeah.
Mhm.
So that's one of the Shure microphone. I just had to drag that out. I haven't used that for ages.
Oh, totally. Oh, that's why I have the Xanadu toaster. It's behind me here. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's like just even the things from the movie, it's like you want to have those things because it just is so visually symbolic of that film.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's funny, I don't have a poster yet for the film, which is unusual. I
Get
know.
thee to eBay. Get on eBay, man.
Yeah.
Get cracking.
And I love that you love, because this movie deserves a lot more recognition. But I mean, the film itself, to me, it's good. It's good. It really is, and it's beautiful. But the is what keeps it alive. I mean, I still can't reiterate to cult musical fans. I'm like, you have Stevie Nicks, Tom Petty, Jim Steinman writing songs for this movie. It's like, that was a gold mine of just songwriters galore. And Stevie Nicks originally went on, subsequently went on to record Sorcerer on one of her albums. I actually prefer this version. Of course, I Can Dream About You song was Never Be You was written by Tom Petty. And then I don't know, do you guys think that all those songs plus the two Jim Steinman songs fit well together? Or do you think they're out of place with one another?
I think in terms of the movie, I mean, the overall idea of the movie being sort of not one set generation, I think they totally fit together for that. I think that's like the best executed thing besides the overall look of the movie. Like they had that right, they had the look right, and then they had this bunch of music right, especially with, like as I mentioned before, the blasters, and then this, like I say, when this is on sort of a leading edge of trends. I mean, getting into the 80s, the other thing that got real big was that sort of cowboy rockabilly thing. And that's kind of the blasters are taking that in that direction. And then that goes into movies like Roadhouse and other things where that was super hot as well.
Yeah, and I agree. Like, if you see the film and you can see how it all kind of ties together, kind of thing, and how the rationale as to why the songs are there, but it works. If you just pick the soundtrack up and you weren't familiar with the film, it might seem a little bit like, oh, it's all very different. But yeah, I think it complements the film quite well, and you could easily listen to the soundtrack without thinking, oh, it's all kind of very different. I really like I don't know if you're going to talk about this, James, but I really like how, I really like the versions in the film of Sorcerer and Never Be You. I think, from what I read, I think it was Laurie Sargent, who was one of the Jim Stone singers, that sang those songs. And I hope they just release it one day with those versions on it, because I actually prefer them to the soundtrack versions.
I think
I don't know.
I think Marilyn Martin was the one on the soundtrack,
Yeah. For Sorcerer, she did Sorcerer, I think.
which is beautiful. And the way that I
Yeah.
love the music's great, is really kick-ass, but I really love the way that they shot every music sequence, because they're all very music video almost
Yes.
inspired.
I wish the rest of the movie was shot like that. And I feel like it isn't. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Like they really like brought their A game when it came to the music sequences, but then the rest of it's kind of like again, man.
Yeah.
Especially Sorcerer. I mean, not Sorcerer. Well, yeah, Sorcerer, especially Sorcerer. It's fit very strange in the film. And when it comes on, there's flashes and there's close-ups and there's all different sort of I guess close-ups and flashes of the city. It's done very unusual, but I think it's beautiful. And even Never Be You, I think it's called Never Be You. It's in black and white and it's on the TV, and it's like in his mind. And I don't know, I think it's gorgeously done. I think there's lots of ideas that they tried to do with this film, and try to throw lots of ideas that they had, that I guess there was no cohesion, but I think it works in some way.
It's like if this plus like a little bit of MTV, a little bit more of MTV, a little bit of Nicholas Rogue sort of thing, all of that would have really kicked it up a notch overall.
Yeah. And I absolutely love the as you're saying, the Sorcerer, that clip, how it's like flashing on and off, and she's kind of just standing in front of that neon. I did see pictures somewhere online like a while ago, and of them actually filming, they're photographing that, and she was kind of, or maybe it was in one of the documentaries, and she was just standing on something and the camera was kind of going around her or something. I remember they were talking about that, but I just thought that was really good, and I just like the arrangement for the version in the film and the soundtrack version. But it's that kind of just pulsing, and it just sounds more like a simplified version with the vocals, and that I really like it. I wish that was released on something. Maybe it's a lot.
The soundtrack and in this film, you can hear Stevie Nicks in the background. You've got to listen really carefully. Now, if someone didn't tell you that Stevie Nicks wrote this song, you probably wouldn't notice it. But if you even hear like on the very last note on the soundtrack, you can hear Stevie Nicks singing background vocals. I don't know. I know the answer to this personally, but do you think this movie would have worked and would have had the lasting legacy that it has if there were no music like this in it?
It needed this. I mean, because like I say, some of the other things were so kind of, this I think really kicked it up a notch. I mean, I don't know how well this soundtrack must have done well, kind of in the same way that Xanadu's track had done well, to sort of save that end of the movie. So yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and it was definitely the music that the main things that stand out for me were the musical numbers and the that fight scene, that really extended fight scene where they're clicking, and I think it took a week for them to film that, and it just became a lot of crowd yelling and stuff like that, and then it kind of became silent. That was very intense. I really liked that scene, and the musical numbers are what really drew me to this film, I suppose. So for me, absolutely. And if it's supposed to be if it was going to be a trilogy or something like that, I don't know how that would work. Like the second one, would that not be a musical, or would it still be a musical, but just kind of different?
It
It's
would have
interesting.
done because this movie was marketed, even in the posters, as a rock and roll fable. They probably would have gotten maybe not the same songwriters, possibly, or other really popular songwriters at the time to continue. I wish in my mind Heart could have contributed songs for the sequel, or Fleetwood Mac, not only Stevie Nicks, possibly, I don't know. I wish it's all about what could have been. I'm thinking about like the opening of Nowhere Fast and how gorgeous it is that it intertwines with, the shots of the city, and it's introducing us to this world of how gritty and how neon it is. And what I love about it is this most of the film is done at night. There are some morning scenes, but what I really love about it, kind of like Dick Tracy, is that a lot of the plot and a lot of the movie takes place at night. And so I think there's a lot of great conscious decisions that were done. But I guess before we move on to other parts of this movie, do you think that there was just too many, besides the great music, that I wouldn't change anything? I would like to have a deluxe soundtrack where some of the songs in the movie appeared, the versions of the movie. But besides the beautiful, pristine music, do you think there was just too many ideas that they tried to throw in a pot to see if it would stick?
Yeah, I mean, I think they paid so much attention to certain elements of it, and those were extremely highly well produced that they forgot about the plot and they forgot about the sort of the heart of the actors. I really think that, I mean, they had such good ingredients, all the ingredients were right, but then they sort of it's kind of like, I mean, and I don't want to say anything, too crazy, but it's kind of like how I think of Titanic. It's like everything was right. Everything about it was right, except that you stick this Jack and Rose in there and it's fake and it is implausible for the time and all this kind of stuff. It's like, but I know that did a lot better than this, but it's like all of the ingredients are there except for this kind of the relationship. The thing that you really should care about is not that great.
And
Which
maybe there was too many. There was maybe it's possible that there's just too many good ideas that they're trying to put all together in one thing, and because there's too many good things, that nothing really, like some things don't work that well. Maybe that's what's happened here, but it's such a big combination of different music styles and different kind of look from the usual film and that kind of thing, and another world kind of thing, another reality. It was just, maybe it was just not for the average viewer. That maybe it was a little bit complex for the
you
average person. I'm not sure.
you brought up a really important point. If they were going to do sequels, they would have had to have Ellen in it because she's the only person besides the band in the film that really sing. And what has always pissed me off is that they didn't get Diane Lane to sing in this film when she sings great. She was in the cult movie, the punk rock cult movie musical, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains. So I don't know why they had her lip sync in this film versus sing, because she can actually sing. So they would have had to find a way to bring Ellen back in the sequels if they wanted it to continue to be a movie musical, because this whole movie was marketed as a rock fable. And it would have been very strange if they didn't. They took the only character that sings out of the sequels, and then how would it have been a sequel? Because Michael Perrier doesn't sing. I mean, he lip sync and Eddie and the Cruisers and Eddie and the Cruisers too. Eddie lives, but I think they would have had to have her back in order for it to be a musical trilogy. And it's a shame because I think that would have been really revolutionary to have a trilogy of rock musicals.
Yeah, I have no idea how that would have worked if with the way you're setting up with the way they were teeing up the second and third movies. It just like I said, it just seems like they had a lot of big ideas and then it just kind of went,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
ice and desert, where
Ice and
they're
desert, yeah. Like,
And
so
and if they were going to use her raw voice, yeah, she can sing. I don't know if she is. Maybe they just thought she wasn't going to be able to do the Jim Steinman numbers. I think they said very few people can, and they blended like three voices together to do a lot of that. But they could have blended her voice with some other people, and that could have been done
Yeah.
like that. She could have done Sorcerer. She could have done Never Be You. So I'm not sure why, but I actually, this is going a little bit away from this topic, but I don't think they actually used her. She's such a great actress. I remember her in a lot of films when she was young, a lot younger, and she's such a great actress. They're actually comparing her to, I think Laurence Olivier worked with her in some film, and he was comparing her to, I can't remember now, but he thought she was fantastic. She doesn't seem to. She seems that she's not really showing off her acting skills in this film either. I don't think it's just very. I remember her saying she wanted to be semi-blasé and all that with the character and that kind of thing in an interview. But there's no real dramatic scenes where she's kind of like this amazing, like an amazing scene where she's showing off her real acting skills. I don't think they were highlighted in this film either. But she could definitely have been involved in the soundtrack. I don't know why they decided not to use her voice in any of the songs.
Well,
Um,
even in
sorry.
Sorcerer, and even in the song Sorcerer, they blend Stevie Nicks' voice with two other women.
Yeah, so they could have done it. Yeah.
Yeah, she really is, acting wise, she really is like a lot of, she's kind of like the baggage of the movie. Like, go get the bag, bring it back, you know, kind of thing. She doesn't get a chance to really do that much.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes, she was very damsel in distress, though. But
Yeah.
I think she still had some sort of fiery nature about herself, because she does argue with Tom Cody, but at the same time, they make up and break up, and so she from one scene she's like, "I hate you, don't leave," or leave, and then the next scene, they're in bed together saying, "Don't leave, I want to go with you."
And the
So
next scene, he's punching her in the face. Ridiculous.
I think ideas, a lot of ideas they tried to do, and I think, I don't know, it's just a shame. I really would have loved to see the Tom Cody trilogy, to see what they could have done with like the whole fire, then ice, then desert. Very Mad Max. I mean, what year did Mad Max come out, if you don't mind me asking?
The original one. Do you remember the first one?
I think it's like late 70s. I can
Yeah,
look
it
it up.
is. Yeah. Yeah.
Let me see. Because that could have, I hate to typecast any movie set in the desert has to be compared to Mad Max. I mean, Tank Girl takes place in the desert, but I don't want to consider Tank Girl to be the female Mad Max,
1979, and inspired many, many, many imitators at the time.
There you
Yeah.
go.
So
Yeah.
if this would have taken, so I think it's kind of smart that they would have done fire and then this whole ice world, ice kingdom, and then this desert kingdom. But do you think it would have, this is a really far-fetched question, do you think it would have been set up for failure if it would have gotten that, because of how popular Mad Max was at the time, and then Thunderdome and all of that? It would have been compared to that, so it would have had to have some element that made it original.
Definitely, because this is different, because the look of it's different from any of the Mad Max films and everything. The Streets of Fire, the original one, is very different. But if, like you said, if the next one's going to be set like out in the wilderness or something like that, it would seem very much of a kind of a Mad Max ripoff, I suppose. So they'd have to do something to make it very original, like a lot more original. So it would stand out apart from Mad Max.
Yeah, it's a question of the world that these movies inhabit. It's like, okay, there's these sort of big cities, but then why is there a wasteland? Why is there an icy wasteland, and why is there a desert wasteland?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I would need to have that be set up a little bit more to understand, like, this is the kingdom of Chicago is where the remnants of all the cities are, and then the rest of the west is demolished and desert and icy and whatever.
Yeah,
but they don't go that far.
Like Beyond Thunderdome, it was all like a post apocalypse kind of thing. So how would they do this? Like, yeah, what would be the setup? What would be the what would be the rationale for uh, the situation that he's in if he's out kind of in this wasteland kind of setting.
It'd have to be like in a southwestern sort of a thing, right?
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah,
But
Like-
I think instead of focus, I think they were trying to make him like Indiana Jones. So I don't think the world that, Ellen and the rest of these characters inhabit would have necessarily continued over to this ice kingdom and then this desert kingdom or this. I think it would have been more like the continuing adventures of Tom Cody versus Streets of Fire 2. Does that make sense? Like, here's where Tom Cody is now without necessarily having a rational explanation of its connection with the world in the first. I don't know how they would have been interested to see. I'll really be interested to see, which leads into the legacy. I'm really interested to see if like Boom Comics or Dark Horse Comics continuing this as a graphic novel series. I would consider that really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if that would be definitely the way to introduce, other realms that he would inhabit as a character. But still, I would want some kind of DNA from the first movie to be
Ellen or
carried
and-
through something. Or, like a 50s, small town 50s in, the desert or something like that. Just something to carry it over.
yeah. I agree. Yes.
So this movie, obviously, I forgot to mention Lee Ving, who I always see him in this film. He was in the cult musical Get Crazy.
Hmm.
Ed Begley Jr. Is it Begley Jr. or Bigley Jr.?
Bailey Jr., yeah.
He's in this
Yeah.
but he's in the movie Get Crazy. So that's the connection. But Lee Ving also played Mr. Body in Clue, and he was in
Oh, that's awesome.
their cult musical and cult movie DNA.
Yeah.
So obviously came and went without any fanfare. And it was years and years and years before it even got a bare bones DVD release. And it's really sad because you have a super successful song from this film, I Can Dream About You. And then, of course, did Sorcerer. But this movie came and went without fanfare. Now, before we get into the lasting legacy of this movie and sort of the tentacles that spread, because it didn't stop there, let's just focus before we get into that on why you think this movie came and went without any fanfare. Is because the studio? Is because of the mix mash of weird things, or if you think it's just a combination of everything?
I have to wonder if it was another after the test screenings it sounded like the test screenings did not go that great. So I had to wonder if it sort of became, another Hollywood tax write-off kind of a situation where we had sunk so much money into this. I guess we're just going to let it go so that we can write the whole mess off. I have to wonder. Yeah, I don't have any hard facts, unfortunately.
And I actually, like, from an Australian perspective, I don't remember it being marketed. I don't remember seeing commercials for it. Maybe I just missed it. But like I said, my first exposure was when I saw these video covers when I went to the video store. I'd never heard of it before, and because of renting the videos, I ended up buying the soundtrack. And just really fell in love with the soundtrack. But I don't remember a big marketing thing or hearing about it on the radio or anything like that. So I don't know if it was, I don't know what the marketing strategy or how that played out in America or England or Europe, but I just don't remember hearing about it in Australia. So maybe after the test screenings, they thought this is not really going to work. So maybe we won't spend too much money on marketing, but I just don't know.
Well,
Do you remember?
I don't know. I do know that a lot of internet fan sites way before I saw Streets of Fire, it was on my list to watch, but I knew that it had an underground cult following that reminisced about how it was unjustly critiqued and how it was unjustly looked over and passed over. I honestly think it just went and came without any fanfare, but I do know that they told Michael Perrier while they were filming this that it was going to be the first of 3 films. I do know that they told him that, so he had the expectation of that. But I don't know, it's got to suck when you're thinking you're making a trilogy and the first one comes and it goes.
Oh, Absolutely. No,
Mm.
totally. I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember what kind of movies it was up against that year, because as we know, like 1984 was, I think Ghostbusters was out that year, if I'm not wrong. Um, I'm just doing a quick Google here on what it was up against, because I have a feeling it was probably up against some pretty heavy hitters.
Helena is our movie historian, and she's going to tell us which movies it was up against, because it's really important in terms of, why a lot of films fell.
Footloose.
Oh yeah,
Oh.
Footloose, yep. I mean, that probably scratched a lot of people's musical itch, and they were like, hey, we have Footloose.
Ha. If-
Yeah. Ooh. Angel came out that year. What a great movie. The Never-Ending Story. I'm just looking at the Splash,
Yeah.
which Daryl Hannah, I guess, passed on this so she could be in Splash.
God.
Yeah.
Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom came out 84.
Yep.
The
Yep.
Terminator.
Oh yeah. Yep. Purple Rain. I mean, that was, you know,
So it had
I
a
think-
lot backed against original in terms of it succeeding, which is really sad. I mean, the marketing should have been better, but at the same time, regardless if marketing is great, if people don't feel like the film has anything substantial to it, it may or may not succeed. I mean, it's sad that, Eddie and the Cruisers flopped, but the song On the Dark Side did so well that it warranted a sequel. They brought Michael Perry and the cast back for a sequel called Eddie Lives, which is horrible. But that movie saved the film, and it makes you wonder why, if the song I Can Dream About You was so successful, when it didn't lead people to say, "Oh yeah, let's see the continued adventures of Ellen, Avon, and Tom Cody."
well, I have to wonder, I think that the song was more popular because it came out on that artist's like next album.
Mm,
And so I think it pushed that album more so than it pushed the movie. But on a side note, I was going to say, I know why it did not do great box office, because you know what it was up against? Breaking 2 Electric Boogaloo. So it just drained the coffers right there.
oh my God. Break two.
Breaking 2.
What-
There was also Gremlins and Police Academy came out that year as well. Romancing the Stone.
Yep. Massive. Yeah, it was a massive year for all that. Oh, Repo Man was out that year. Yeah, there's just so many, like Johnny Dangerously. Oh, I love that movie. Anyway, yeah, big year for films.
And it's interesting when James, when you're mentioning I Can Dream About You, because I actually always thought it was an African American that sang that song after watching the film. I didn't realize it was a white guy.
Right. Yeah, totally.
But I was older.
Interesting sort of, I don't know, that was a very interesting choice to do, because then you equate, like, I heard that song before I heard that song way before I even knew this movie existed. So when I saw that, I was like, what? But I mean, I guess it works for the movie. I don't know. I guess it's what they wanted them to. They would try to market them as a doo-wop group. Again, the weird blur between 80s, 70s, 60s, 50s.
Mhm.
Um, so the film flopped, and of course it became a cult movie musical with the rise of the internet, etc. But even before it obtained a cult movie musical status, and before it became a cult film, a lot of the songs and the characters and the names appeared in other media. So Jim Steinman, who, rest in peace, he was probably one of the best songwriters of the last century. I consider him a better songwriter than Andrew Lloyd Webber. Don't come for me, theater queens. I don't care. But he had a really interesting habit. I don't want to say lazy, I say genius habit of reusing every single song he's ever written again and again and again and again. So, of course, he wrote all of Meatloaf songs for Bad Outta Hell 1 and 2, but those songs were a lot of the songs from Bad Outta Hell and Bad Outta Hell 2 were from previous projects that he did in college called The Dream Engine, and another one, another musical that never got off the ground. And then he had a lot of those songs like Total Eclipse the Heart, and um it's all coming back to me now, an Original Sin for Pandora's Box. And of course, Original Sin was recorded by Taylor Dane, who I love. And it's all coming back to me now, Celine Dion. But he has a tenet for recycling songs over and over again. So he gave Nowhere Fast to Meatloaf. It was on one of Meatloaf's albums that weren't really popular. Meatloaf recorded it. And Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young. I don't know if you know this, but he had like, I think a month or 2 months to write an entire score for a German musical, Tanz der Vampire, Dance of the Vampires, which I've seen twice. And Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young and Total Eclipse of the Heart appear in that musical. But Tonight, What It Means to Be Young closes that musical, but it's called Dance of the Vampires. But it blends some vampiric lyrics with Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young. So it took on a life of its own that way in the 90s, starring Steve Burton, who was in the original Phantom of the Opera.
Hmm.
So it didn't stop there. Sorcerer, of course, was recorded by Stevie Nicks, but at least the music was able to continue some way. And regardless if we never get a stage adaptation, some of the songs in this movie sort of reappear in spirit in Jim Steinman's Bat Out of Hell musical. Because it's very similar to this, bikers, and it's like a rock and roll retelling of Peter Pan. And one of the characters' name is Raven. So there's that. Jim Steinman kept this movie alive through the music that he used in subsequent projects. And I know that's not really a way to continue a legacy, but at least these songs were able to live on, even if they were in different projects, especially with Dance of the Vampires, which is still running in Germany. It's the most successful musical. You'll have to Google that. It came to Broadway briefly, but it's still playing in Germany. But Tonight, What It Means to Be Young became the Vampire Dance. But so the sequels were canceled, of course, but the music lived on in terms of being in other projects. And, Jim Steinman kept the vision alive, I guess you could say, with his adaptation of Bat Out of Hell, the musical that's still playing over here in England, especially with the character named Raven. So there's that. And I don't know if you're aware, there is an unofficial movie sequel to this movie. I don't know if you're aware of it.
I read that, but I didn't remember what it was.
There is.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
It's cringe, but if you give it 3 or 4 or 5 sort of viewings, then you get used to it. It's called Road to Hell, and it's subtitled Streets of Fire 2. Had nothing to do with Universal, had nothing to do with the creators, and it's by Albert Pyun, who was
Albert Pyun, R.I.P. He just died recently. Oh, poor guy. Yeah, he was a very prolific filmmaker. He made a lot of really kind of cool, like kind of B movies. And I think I remember. I'm looking up at Road to Hell now. I swear to God, I remember. It came out in '89, right?
No, he came out in 2008.
Oh, did it? Okay, it's a different one then. But yeah.
He did Captain America, like the original
Right.
Captain.
Yes, it's really good.
The really weird cult movie musical called Vicious Lips, which you can watch on YouTube. But yeah, he loved this movie so much that he was like, if there's not going to be a movie, a sequel, I'm going to make a sequel. I think there was something really brave about him. Like he made a lot of sequels to movies that he had no rights to, which
Right.
is cool. But Road to Hell has Michael Perrier as Tom Cody.
Oh, too funny. I'll have to go check that out because yeah, I've been on an Albert Pyun tear recently because of his passing. So
You
that's
can
awesome.
watch it, and it takes place in the desert.
I love it.
And Ellen's daughter's in it. And back and Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young is in it because Jim Steinman granted permission. So if you can't get something done, why not do it yourself?
That's why we have Redbubble, right, Dave?
Absolutely. That was very quick.
Call back.
On my YouTube,
What's that film? Actually, I just looked that up as you were mentioning, and I can see the poster. So I think that song is on YouTube. That version of Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young with that person singing it. So I'll have to watch that. So how do you watch the film? Is that on?
I was about to say, I've put it on my YouTube channel under my playlist of over 80 plus free cult movie musicals to watch, but I'll send you the direct link when we're over with this episode. It's cringy, but it's a love letter to Streets of Fire. I mean, Albert, how do you pronounce his last name, Helena?
Pune?
Albert Hume. He
Pune,
did not.
yeah.
He's like, I don't have the rights to Streets of Fire, but Streets of Fire will never have a sequel. I'm going to make a sequel to it. And Michael Perry is in it as Tom Cody, and it takes place in the desert. And Ellen's in it via flashbacks played by another actress who looks a lot like Diane Lane. But the young girl in the film is the daughter of Tom Cody and Ellen, so who looks a lot like Diane Lane, but it's a lame, but it's the closest thing right now that we're ever going to get to a sequel because it's an unofficial sequel.
I'll have to watch it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm trying to find that at the local video store here and they don't have it and they have everything. So, huh. Go
Never
fig.
It was only released on VOD. And thankfully some wonderful, beautiful person uploaded on YouTube, and I got it before it was snatched and put it on the YouTube playlist. So it's, again, don't compare it to Streets of Fire, but love the cheesy tribute to it. And Michael Perrier acts better in that film than he does in Streets of Fire.
Or season, maybe. Yeah, by then. Uh-huh.
So cool that Michael Perrier decided to be in Road to Hell, but also Jim Steinman was like, right on, take the music.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, Albert Pune also did Alien from LA, which is a gloriously bad movie. Really good.
Oh my
Okay.
God. Trump has entered the chat. He heard Alien in LA. Terrible joke.
Terrible.
Road to Hell, for all intents and purposes, is hopefully not, but at this particular moment is the only sequel that we'll ever get. I mean, there was no merchandise for this as far as I can tell. I mean, I think your friend has gotten everything that there ever was.
Yes, I think, Dave, you have everything. Although I do know a guy who makes action figures. So should you ever need one, hit me up. I can connect you guys.
God, don't get me started. Don't get me onto all that. I'll be running out of room.
Yeah, that's how I was with Beyond the Black Rainbow. All of a sudden, I had the entire cast of action figures, even the minor characters, and it was really bad.
Actually, and I just wanted to mention before I forget, I remember when this film, it would have been when this film was released, 1984. At the end of 1984, Diane Lane came out to Australia and she was on a television show called The Bert Newton Show. So it was just it was like Johnny Carson kind of thing. She was on that episode, was also Olivia Newton-John, the same episode. And I'm trying to find that on YouTube, but I can find the Olivia Newton-John part, but they don't include the Diane Lane part. So I'm still looking, but I do remember that she came out to Australia and that would have been for this film. So that would have been part of the marketing thing now I'm thinking of it. I just don't remember anything to do with trailers on television or the posters or anything like that. But yeah, but she did come out to Australia to promote it, and she was on the same show as Olivia.
Yeah.
There's really a connection besides, I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised it didn't do well in Australia. You guys have a passion for resurrecting some of our cult movie musicals and making them big.
You know where it did do well was Japan. I guess Streets of Fire was really big in Japan. And it kind of spawned its own genre of sort of juvenile delinquent, high style juvenile delinquent films in Japan, which I've seen some of those and they're actually really good. So, I mean, I guess if you're looking for legacy, that's a good little, you have a high style Japan legacy, which is kind of cool.
There's a Japanese cult movie musical that's basically the Japanese version of this called Burst City. But it's just like Streets of Fire, basically, and it's totally inspired by it. So maybe that's another legacy of Streets of Fire. So maybe that's something that, I mean, that makes sense when you said about it did well in Japan, because Burst City is basically Streets of Fire, but in Japanese and in some dystopian world.
Well, it fits because, I mean, if you think about Streets of Fire, it's kind of a manga in a way. I mean, you really look at it in the style of it. I could see it being a manga, but also the Japanese at that time were sort of obsessed with America in the 50s, which is why we sent all of our Levi's jeans over them so that people could buy the jeans and look like, greasers from the 50s. So it's interesting, this is the little subcultural mashup that happened there, I think.
And William Dafoe, of course, became a huge star, which is,
Oh, yeah.
and he's always been a character that I can name a few films of his, but I'm still waiting for like that one film that I'm like, oh my God, that's his Oscar-worthy performance. Maybe I don't know enough about him.
Oh, have you seen The Lighthouse?
With Robert Pattinson?
Yeah.
It's a very strange film.
Made you uncomfortable, I gather.
Well, the mermaids. I was like, oh, it's a mermaid. Oh, it's a mermaid.
Yeah, exactly. It's the world's most unsexy mermaid ever.
I haven't seen that film yet. I want to see it, so I'm gonna have to watch it.
Oh yeah, go watch it. It's long, get prepared to kind of strap in and watch it, but William Dafoe is amazing in it. He's so great. Are you fond of me, lobster? You're fond of me, lobster.
It's
Anyway,
so now that we know that, this movie does have a cult following, obviously, we have one of the biggest Streets of Fire fans here. What would you hope? I mean, what would you hope for the legacy to be? Would you like it to be sort of this underground thing that is on Blu-ray, but it's still like underappreciated? Or would you like it to sort of take on a life sort of like Repo the Genetic Opera, where now it's getting fan cast or shadow casting and screenings? Or do you want it to be, you think it should just be left alone for what it is?
I think I know it's actually just about to be released on 4K as well. In the next, like, probably now or something.
nice.
I was reading about that a couple of months ago. So I just maybe how it is, maybe just I think people would like it for people like this film just for different reasons. And like for me, it was the music. I know my brother-in-law really liked the action scenes and all that kind of stuff. So if more people discover it and they're exposed to it, it just depends on what it is about it that's going to appeal to them. So I just think it'll be I don't think it's going to have a huge resurrection. This huge there's going to be like this huge interest in it where a lot of people are going to be like, oh my God, what's this film? I've never heard of it before. But it's just going to be kind of a growing constant thing where people are going to be discovering or rediscovering it and just appreciating it again or for the first time because of the different things, whatever it is that appeals to them.
I mean, look how long it took Shock Treatment to be recognized. I remember you couldn't even get Shock Treatment on DVD. It was on VHS. And it took forever for it to finally be embraced by the Rocky Horror community. And I believe that Shock Treatment is better than the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Always have thought that.
Agreed.
Always that. But Helena, should be the legacy of this movie, or do you think it'll get there, or do you think it's fine what it is now?
Well, I think that it's a good sign, that it's been out on Blu-ray. It's had a decent Blu-ray release. It's going to have a 4K release, because I think that is kind of the new way of revival of these films. Because I mean, I'm wearing my Hollywood Theater t-shirt. Hollywood Theater here is a local theater in Portland, but it's one of the best, like, kind of repertory houses on the West Coast of the US, where whenever a movie comes out from like a Vinegar Syndrome or something like that, they always put it in the rotation there. So these screenings, they sell out because they know that the folks here know that the program at the Hollywood isn't going to show them something that's a piece of crap. So it's like, then that's how people are seeing, I think, these movies, is that these sort of really reliable, repertory theaters like, Alamo Drafthouse kind of things are showing it. And then that exposes it it puts it in the minds of the right people. And then those people show other people. And that goes for a lot of movies, I think, that are cult movies, is they get this sort of platform at these theaters, and then it makes the rounds, which is kind of cool.
I mean, Dave, you might think that it doesn't have sort of the recognition, that it deserves, but at least it has, like, Shout Factory did a kick-ass job of the Blu-ray and 4K, because there's lots of more popular quote unquote cult musicals like Shock Treatment that's never got a Blu-ray in the States, only in
Mm.
England. And Best Little Whorehouse in Texas only got a bare bones Blu-ray. I mean, there's
Mm.
a limited edition set coming out over here, but the only thing that makes it different is that it comes with lithographs. There's no special features. So I mean, there that is something that it got such a brilliant home video release. I mean, that's something that a lot of cult musicals don't get.
Yeah, somebody was obviously very passionate about this film and got it, in that realm of rep and getting it in front of people. So that's wonderful.
It's
Yeah.
beautiful. It's one of the musicals that takes a couple of tries and a couple of watches to sort of appreciate it. Then you're like, oh, okay. Like I've seen it so many times that like I was just working around the house and listening to it. I was like, oh, okay. But the music is what stops you. The plot is almost like you don't really pay attention to the plot, but when Sorcerer comes on and tonight is what it means to be young, I stop and watch it because that's what makes this movie.
Mhm.
And I guess before we leave, um, is there anything else that you would like to add about this gem, this underrated movie, and anything that you think is special about it before we close?
I just had a really obtuse thought about this in that we've been talking about how it's a musical and how it's also an action movie. And it really makes me want to go watch Miami Connection. If you've
Love
ever seen
action.
it. Yeah, Friends Through Eternity. I mean, it just makes they have those wonderful stage musical. It's kind of like Streets of Fire in a way, just like really, really bad and really, really cheesy. So,
Did you see The Last Dragon
oh, of course, The Last Dragon, show enough.
with Vanity?
R.I.P. Vanity, poor Vanity. She took so much cocaine, it like killed her kidneys. Ugh. Anyway, she became a minister and then like died because she had done so much drugs in the 80s. Poor thing. But
Yeah, we
Well,
still have Ozzy.
and we love her.
We do. We still have Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne he must have sold his soul to Satan to still be alive.
Mhm.
Dang. I think this is your cult musical baby. Do you have anything to say, I guess, to people who haven't seen it or really don't? I keep trying to push this movie to people. I keep trying to push this movie to people. I'm like, you have to watch it. I mean, it's controversial, but I think the music makes it on the same level as Shock Treatment to me because of the music. But do you have anything else to say, I guess, to people who have not given this film a chance or don't even know where to start in terms of watching this film?
I have previously convinced people to watch this, and I know some of the comments were like, "How come I've never heard of this before?" They really, really enjoyed it. I remember listening when I had the soundtrack on cassette, listening to it like on a boombox thing, and I remember laying on the bed and it was kind of. And I remember Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young. There was a function on this boombox where you can make it like a virtual surround. Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young, and that operatic, the harmonies with that solo part at the start before it starts really getting into the song is just so beautiful, and just the harmonies in the background with the chorus, and it's just I find it very such a beautiful song and very moving, and it just keeps building up and up and up, and it's really over the top. So I think it works on quite a few different levels, and as I said before, it just depends on what works for you. But I've encouraged a lot of people to watch it, and everyone's enjoyed it that's seen it throughout the years with my recommendation. So, and like I said, some people have said, "How come I've never heard of this before?" Because they really enjoyed it. Um, yeah, and like some of the tracks on the soundtrack are just incredible, really. They really need to be like enjoyed by a lot of people.
Yeah, and if you ever want to hear Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young in German about vampires, watch Dance of the Vampires. Because I remember being in Germany in Munich and Stuttgart seeing Dance of the Vampires, and the vampires come out and the blood's on the curtain, and there's like Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young, but then it goes into I don't know much German, but it's like where the stony hearted and they, it is talking about like how vampires are always young forever. So, I mean, that's a beautiful twist on this song because I think the song has so many different meanings that I don't know. I think the music is which makes this film and it deserves more recognition, definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds amazing.
But thank y'all so much for being here. And yeah, hopefully people will take this movie more seriously because I think it has the ingredients to be much more prolific than some of the cult movie musicals that we lift up versus this one.
Absolutely.
Maybe
Put
I'm
this
just
one above Repo the Genetic Opera. Just move that down a peg. Let's put this up.
absolutely. And I have my problems with Repo. And with Repo, I like Repo, but the thing is, they intended it for it to be a cult movie musical. They even had shadow cast and callbacks for it, and it failed miserably. But it got resurrected because of the TikTok generation. But I like Repo, but I don't get all of the hoopla
The
around.
songs are shitty, yeah, honestly.
But thank you. Thank you're gonna have people DMing you on cult musicals, and they're gonna be like, "You're gonna be fighting over
Come
Repo."
at me, bro. I mean, the visuals in that movie, beautiful, amazing. Again, everything is right. It's just that one thing is so wrong.
Yeah, Darren Boseman, who's the Saw director, should not be writing music, but that's my only whatever. But thank y'all so much for being here and happy